Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stepped out of the military transport vehicle. The scorching California sun beat down on Naval Base San Diego, where hundreds of new recruits were gathering for what would become the most challenging months of their lives. At 22 years old, Sarah looked smaller than most of the other candidates around her. Standing at 5 feet 4 inches with a lean but muscular build, she had spent the last 2 years preparing for this moment. The other recruits barely glanced her way as they unloaded their gear. Most were focused on the intimidating drill instructors barking orders across the courtyard. But Sarah's attention was drawn to something else entirely. A group of male recruits who had noticed the small tattoo visible on her left shoulder blade as she adjusted her backpack. "Look at that," whispered Jake Morrison, a tall recruit from Texas who had played college football before enlisting. "Little princess thinks she's tough with her cute butterfly tattoo." The tattoo in question was indeed small and delicate-looking. From a distance, it appeared to be nothing more than a simple black design about the size of a silver dollar. Sarah had gotten it 2 years ago, and it had become a source of constant commentary wherever she went in military circles. "Bet she thinks that makes her look badass," chuckled another recruit named Chris Parker. "Wait till the instructors see that. They're gonna eat her alive." Sarah heard the whispers, but kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that reacting to such comments only made things worse. Instead, she focused on organizing her gear and mentally preparing for what lay ahead. The basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, known as BUD/S, had a dropout rate of over 70%. Most people who started the program never finished it. As the recruits were herded into formation, Sarah found herself standing near the back row. The comments about her tattoo continued to ripple through the group, growing more elaborate with each retelling. "I heard she's some kind of rich girl whose daddy bought her way in," someone muttered. "Probably thinks this is like summer camp," added another voice. Chief Petty Officer Williams, a weathered man in his 40s with arms like tree trunks, stepped forward to address the new arrivals. His voice boomed across the courtyard as he began the traditional welcome speech that had terrified generations of SEAL candidates. "Welcome to hell, ladies and gentlemen," he announced. "For the next 6 months, this place will test every fiber of your being. Some of you think you know what you're getting into. You're wrong. Some of you think you're special because you were tough in high school or college. You're about to learn how wrong you are." His eyes scanned the crowd, briefly pausing on Sarah before moving on. "The ocean doesn't care about your feelings. The enemy doesn't care about your excuses. And I sure as hell don't care about whatever brought you here. The only thing that matters is whether you can do the job when lives depend on it." The first few days of training were designed to weed out anyone who wasn't completely committed. Sarah found herself constantly surrounded by skeptical looks and hushed conversations about her appearance. During the first physical fitness test, she noticed several recruits watching her closely, clearly expecting her to fail. The test began with a 500-yard swim in the base pool. Sarah had been a competitive swimmer in high school and college, but the military swim test was different. They had to swim in full uniform, and the water was deliberately kept cold to add an extra element of stress. As Sarah dove into the pool, she heard Jake Morrison call out to his friends, "$20 says Butterfly Girl doesn't make it past the first lap." The nickname Butterfly Girl stuck immediately. Within hours, nearly every recruit was using it to refer to Sarah. She completed the swim test in the top 10% of the class, but that didn't stop the commentary. "Lucky she's a good swimmer," Chris Parker observed as they toweled off afterward. "Won't help her when we get to the real stuff." The next test was push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups. Sarah had always been naturally strong for her size, and her 2 years of intense preparation showed. She maxed out the female standards and came close to matching many of the male scores. But instead of earning respect, her performance only seemed to intensify the scrutiny. "Show off," someone muttered as she finished her final pull-up. "Probably on steroids," suggested another recruit quietly. During lunch that first day, Sarah sat alone at a table in the corner of the mess hall. She had learned in her previous military training that it was often easier to avoid the social dynamics altogether than to try to fit in where she wasn't wanted. But her isolation only fed more speculation about her background and motivations. "I'm telling you, there's something weird about that girl," Jake was saying to a group of recruits at a nearby table. "Nobody just shows up to SEAL training looking like that and performs like that without some kind of special help." "Maybe she's somebody's daughter," suggested Chris. "You know how it is with connected families. They pull strings to get their kids into programs they have no business being in." The conversation was getting louder, clearly intended for Sarah to overhear. She focused on her meal and tried to ignore it, but the comments were becoming more personal and more cruel. That little butterfly tattoo is probably the toughest thing about her, Jake continued. Bet she got it during spring break in Cancun or something equally pathetic. What none of them knew was the true story behind Sarah's tattoo. It wasn't a butterfly at all, though that's what it looked like from a distance. The design was actually much more complex and meaningful than any of them could have imagined. But Sarah had no intention of explaining herself to people who had already decided what kind of person she was. The first week of training was called Indoctrination Week, and it was designed to teach basic military protocols and prepare recruits for the intensity that was coming. During this period, the instructors were relatively calm, saving their most extreme training methods for later phases. But the recruits' behavior towards Sarah was already establishing patterns that would define the next several months. The butterfly tattoo became a symbol that other trainees used to dismiss her before she even had a chance to prove herself. During a particularly challenging obstacle course exercise, Sarah found herself struggling with a rope climb that required significant upper body strength. As she worked to pull herself up the thick rope, she could hear Jake's voice calling out encouragement that was clearly sarcastic. "Come on, butterfly girl. Channel that inner toughness from your tattoo." The instructor running the exercise, Petty Officer Rodriguez, noticed the commentary, but didn't intervene. Part of SEAL training involved learning to perform under psychological pressure, including dealing with hostile or discouraging voices from teammates. Sarah completed the rope climb, though not as quickly as she would have liked. As she dropped to the ground at the top, breathing heavily, Jake approached with a condescending smile. "Hey, not bad for someone who probably got that tattoo on a dare," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "What's the story behind it anyway? Lose a bet in college?" For the first time since arriving at the base, Sarah looked directly at Jake and spoke. "It's personal," she said simply, her voice calm but firm. "Oh, it's personal," Jake repeated mockingly. "Everything's personal with princess types. Can't handle a simple question about your own body art." The group of recruits gathering around them was growing larger. Sarah could sense that this was becoming a defining moment in how she would be treated for the rest of training. She had two choices: engage with Jake's provocation or walk away and be labeled as weak or secretive. "It represents something important to me," she said finally. "That's all you need to know." "Important like what? Your sorority? Your boyfriend back home? Come on, we're all teammates here. Share with the class." Chief Williams appeared seemingly out of nowhere, his massive frame casting a shadow over the gathered recruits. "Is there a problem here?" he asked in a tone that made everyone straighten up immediately. "No, sir," Jake said quickly. "Just getting to know our teammates." "Getting to know your teammates is done through training and shared hardship," Williams replied. "Not through gossiping like a bunch of school children. You want to know what kind of person someone is? Watch how they perform when things get tough. Everything else is just noise." The group dispersed quickly, but the damage was already done. Sarah's tattoo had become a focal point for every doubt and prejudice the other recruits harbored about her presence in the program. That evening, as recruits cleaned their gear and prepared for the next day's training, the conversation inevitably returned to speculation about Sarah's background. The butterfly tattoo had taken on almost mythical proportions in their discussions. "I bet it's covering up something else," suggested a recruit named Mike Torres. "Like a gang tattoo or something she got when she was younger and dumber. Or maybe it's some kind of family thing," offered Chris Parker. "Rich families love their symbolic tattoos. Probably represents her trust fund or something." The theories grew more elaborate and more ridiculous as the evening wore on. Some recruits suggested the tattoo was a code for a secret organization. Others thought it might be covering a scar from plastic surgery. A few believed it was some kind of religious symbol that she was embarrassed about. What bothered Sarah most wasn't the specific theories, but the underlying assumption that she didn't belong in the program and that there must be some explanation beyond her own merit and determination. The tattoo had become a convenient excuse for their bias, a visible symbol they could point to as evidence that she was different and therefore less capable. As she lay in her bunk that night, Sarah thought about the real meaning behind her tattoo. It was connected to a promise she had made to someone very important to her, and it represented a level of commitment and sacrifice that none of her fellow recruits could possibly understand. But she knew that explaining it would only invite more questions and more judgment. The second week of training brought the first real physical challenges. The instructors began implementing the legendary training methods that had forged SEALs for decades: cold water exposure, extended physical exercises, sleep deprivation, and constant psychological pressure became the new normal. During a particularly brutal beach workout in the early morning hours, Sarah found herself struggling to keep up with some of the larger male recruits during a series of bear crawls in the sand. Her smaller frame meant she had to work twice as hard to cover the same distance, and the soft sand made every movement exhausting. Jake Morrison, who was naturally athletic and adapting well to the physical demands, noticed her difficulty and made sure to comment on it loudly enough for the instructors to hear. "Looks like Butterfly Girl is already hitting her limits," he called out as he passed her during a sprint. "Maybe she should have gotten a tougher tattoo, like a shark or something." The comment drew laughs from several other recruits, and Sarah felt her face flush with a combination of exhaustion and anger. But she forced herself to focus on the exercise and ignore the commentary. She knew that showing any emotional reaction would only make the harassment worse. Instructor Rodriguez, who was leading the beach workout, walked over to where Sarah was struggling through her bear crawls. Instead of offering encouragement or criticism, he simply stood beside her and began calling out a steady rhythm. Left, right. Keep your core tight. Breathe through the movement. Sarah appreciated the coaching, but she also noticed that Rodriguez didn't offer the same level of individual attention to other struggling recruits. She wondered if this was because he genuinely wanted to help her improve, or if he was also skeptical about her ability to complete the program and was giving her extra assistance that she hadn't earned. After the workout, as recruits cleaned sand out of their gear and treated various minor injuries, the conversation once again returned to Sarah's tattoo and what it might reveal about her character. "I'm starting to think it's some kind of memorial tattoo," suggested a recruit named David Chun. "Maybe someone close to her died, and she got the butterfly because butterflies represent souls or transformation or whatever." "That would actually make sense," agreed Chris Parker. "It would explain why she gets all defensive when we ask about it. Dead boyfriend or dead parents or something like that." The speculation was getting closer to the truth than Sarah was comfortable with, but she still had no intention of discussing her personal history with people who were looking for any excuse to view her as weak or unfit for the program. Jake Morrison overheard the conversation and decided to take a more direct approach. During lunch that day, he sat down at Sarah's usually empty table without being invited. "So I've been thinking about your tattoo," he said casually, as if they were old friends having a normal conversation. "Some of the guys think it's a memorial for someone who died. Is that what's got you all secretive about it?" Sarah looked up from her meal and studied Jake's face. She could see that he was genuinely curious, but there was also a calculating look in his eyes that suggested he was probing for weakness rather than trying to understand her as a person. "Like I said before, it's personal," she replied evenly. "Come on," Jake pressed. "We're all going through this hell together. If we make it through BUD/S, we're going to be brothers and sisters. We're supposed to trust each other with our lives. How can we do that if you won't even tell us the story behind a little tattoo?" It was a clever argument, and Sarah could see that other recruits at nearby tables were listening to the conversation. Jake was making her seem like the unreasonable one for maintaining her privacy about something that appeared harmless. "Trust is earned through actions, not through sharing personal stories," Sarah said finally. "When the time comes for you to trust me with your life, my tattoo won't matter. My performance will." "Right, but that's just it," Jake said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Your performance has been solid so far, I'll give you that. But there's something about you that doesn't add up. You show up here looking like you belong in a college sorority. You've got this delicate little butterfly tattoo that screams suburban princess. But then, you perform like you've been training for this your whole life. It's weird." Sarah realized that Jake's real issue wasn't with her tattoo specifically, but with the fact that she didn't fit into his preconceived notions about what a SEAL candidate should look like. The tattoo was just the most visible symbol of that disconnect. "Maybe your assumptions about what people should look like are wrong," she suggested quietly. "Maybe," Jake admitted. "Or maybe there's more to your story than you're letting on. Either way, that butterfly is becoming like a mystery for everyone here. People are starting to make up their own explanations, and some of them aren't very flattering." Sarah appreciated the warning, but she also recognized the implicit threat in Jake's words. He was essentially telling her that if she didn't provide an explanation he found acceptable, he would continue to let others create increasingly negative narratives about her background and motivations. That afternoon brought the first major water exercise of the program. Recruits were required to swim in full gear through rough ocean conditions while carrying additional weight. It was designed to simulate some of the aquatic challenges they would face in actual SEAL operations. As Sarah prepared for the exercise, adjusting her gear and checking her equipment, she noticed that several recruits were watching her more closely than usual. The morning's conversation with Jake had apparently spread, and now everyone was curious to see how Butterfly Girl would handle her first real test in the ocean. The water was cold and choppy, with waves that made swimming in a straight line nearly impossible. Sarah had always been comfortable in the water, but swimming in full military gear while carrying extra weight was entirely different from anything she had experienced before. As she entered the water with the rest of her group, Sarah heard Jake call out one final comment that was clearly intended to rattle her confidence. "Hope that butterfly can swim, princess." The exercise was brutal. The weight of the gear combined with the cold water and rough conditions pushed every recruit to their limits. Sarah found herself falling behind the lead group, but she was determined not to be among the last to finish. Halfway through the swim, she noticed that one of the smaller recruits, a young man named Tommy Peterson from Iowa, was struggling badly. He was clearly exhausted and having difficulty staying afloat with all his gear. The safety instructors were watching him, but they hadn't intervened yet. Sarah had a choice to make. She could focus on her own performance and try to move up in the rankings, or she could help a fellow recruit who was clearly in trouble. The decision would likely affect how the instructors viewed her priorities and leadership potential. Without hesitation, Sarah changed course and swam over to Tommy. "Hey, you okay?" she called out over the sound of the waves. I'm struggling," Tommy admitted, clearly embarrassed. "This gear is so much heavier than I expected." "Here," Sarah said, positioning herself next to him. "Swim beside me and match my rhythm. Don't fight the waves, work with them." For the next 15 minutes, Sarah essentially coached Tommy through the rest of the exercise. She showed him how to adjust his stroke to compensate for the extra weight, and how to time his breathing to avoid taking in water during the larger waves. They finished the exercise together, not in last place, but certainly not near the front of the pack. As they dragged themselves onto the beach, exhausted and shivering, Sarah noticed that several instructors had been watching their interaction closely. Jake Morrison was also watching, and his expression was unreadable. Sarah couldn't tell if he respected what she had done or if he viewed it as another sign that she was too soft for the program. "Interesting choice," Martinez called out instructor Rodriguez as Sarah and Tommy checked in with the safety team. "Help a struggling teammate or focus on your own performance? Which do you think is more important for a SEAL?" It was clearly a test question, and Sarah knew that her answer would be evaluated carefully. "A SEAL team is only as strong as its weakest member, sir," she replied. "If we can't help each other succeed in training, how can we trust each other to complete missions?" Rodriguez nodded approvingly, but Sarah noticed that not all the other recruits looked pleased with her answer. Some, including Jake, seemed to view her assistance to Tommy as grandstanding or showing off rather than genuine teamwork. That evening, as recruits recovered from the day's exercises and prepared their gear for the next day, the conversation about Sarah's tattoo took on new dimensions. Her actions during the swimming exercise had impressed some recruits while reinforcing others' suspicions that she was trying too hard to prove herself. "I'll give her credit," Tommy Peterson was telling a group of recruits. "She didn't have to help me out there, but she did. Whatever her story is, she's got good instincts for teamwork. Or she's trying to make herself look good to the instructors," countered Jake Morrison. "Think about it. Help the struggling guy while everyone's watching. Get praised for teamwork. Make everyone forget that you've got a butterfly tattoo, and look like you belong in a beauty pageant instead of special operations." The competing narratives about Sarah's character and motivations were becoming more entrenched with each passing day. Her tattoo remained the focal point for all the speculation, a small symbol that had come to represent everything her fellow recruits didn't understand about her presence in the program. As Sarah cleaned her gear and prepared for sleep that night, she reflected on how quickly the dynamics of the training group had formed. In just 2 weeks, she had been categorized, labeled, and judged based on superficial characteristics that had nothing to do with her actual capabilities or commitment to the program. The butterfly tattoo had become both a burden and a motivation. Every time someone made a comment about it, Sarah was reminded of the promise it represented and the reasons she had chosen this incredibly difficult path. But she also knew that the real tests were still ahead, and that her fellow recruits' attitudes toward her would only matter if she allowed them to affect her performance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Sarah was determined to face them with the same quiet determination that had brought her this far. The mockery and speculation would continue, but she knew that eventually actions would speak louder than assumptions. The butterfly tattoo would remain her secret for now, but Sarah was confident that when the time came for her to prove herself beyond any doubt, the truth behind that small symbol would speak for itself in ways that her critics could never imagine. 3 weeks into BUD/S training, the atmosphere at Naval Base San Diego had become increasingly tense. The initial phase of relatively manageable exercises was ending, and every recruit knew that Hell Week was approaching. This legendary 5 and a half-day period of nearly continuous training with minimal sleep would eliminate more candidates than all the previous weeks combined. Sarah Martinez had found her rhythm in the daily routines, but the social dynamics within her training class had become more complex and challenging than the physical exercises themselves. The butterfly tattoo on her shoulder had evolved from a simple curiosity into an ongoing source of division among the recruits. Jake Morrison had appointed himself as the unofficial leader of the group that viewed Sarah with suspicion. His influence had grown as other recruits began to adopt his skeptical attitude toward her presence in the program. During morning physical training sessions, Jake would often position himself where he could observe Sarah's performance and comment on it to nearby recruits. "Watch how she modifies every exercise just enough to make it easier," he would whisper during push-up competitions. Classic technique of someone who's been coached specifically for this program. Real candidates have to figure it out as they go. The accusations of special preparation or insider knowledge had become a recurring theme in the group's discussions about Sarah. Her consistent performance across different types of exercises was being interpreted not as evidence of thorough preparation and dedication, but as proof that she had received unfair advantages. Chris Parker, who had become Jake's most vocal supporter, had developed an elaborate theory about Sarah's background that he shared with anyone willing to listen. According to Chris, Sarah was the daughter of a high-ranking military officer who had arranged for her to receive private coaching and insider information about BUD/S training protocols. Think about it, Chris would argue during meal breaks. How else does someone with a butterfly tattoo show up here and immediately know exactly how to pace herself during every exercise? She's been getting professional training while the rest of us had to figure it out from books and videos. The theory gained traction among recruits who were struggling with certain aspects of the training. It was easier to believe that Sarah had unfair advantages than to accept that she might simply be better prepared or more naturally suited to the demands of the program. Tommy Peterson, the recruit Sarah had helped during the ocean swimming exercise, found himself caught between competing loyalties. He was grateful for Sarah's assistance and respected her abilities, but he also didn't want to alienate himself from the larger group by defending her too vigorously. "I think you guys might be overthinking this," Tommy suggested cautiously during one evening discussion. "Maybe she's just really dedicated to being here. Some people prepare harder than others." "Dedicated is one thing," Jake replied dismissively. "But look at her. She looks like she belongs on a magazine cover, not a battlefield. That butterfly tattoo is like a neon sign saying, 'I've never faced real hardship in my life.' People who choose tattoos like that don't choose lives like this unless someone's pulling strings for them." The conversation was taking place in the barracks common area, where Sarah was reading a training manual at a table in the corner. She had learned to tune out most of the speculation about her background, but Jake's latest comments were loud enough that she couldn't ignore them completely. David Chun, who had been relatively neutral in the ongoing debates about Sarah, decided to inject a different perspective into the discussion. "You know, you guys are making a lot of assumptions based on pretty limited evidence," he pointed out. "Maybe the tattoo means something we don't understand. Maybe she's tougher than she looks. Or maybe she's exactly what she looks like," Jake countered. A privileged girl who thought it would be exciting to try something dangerous got her daddy to make some phone calls, and now she's in over her head, but too proud to quit. The accusation of using family connections to gain admission to BUD/S was particularly galling to Sarah because it was so far from the truth. Her path to SEAL training had been longer and more difficult than any of her critics could imagine, and she had overcome obstacles that would have stopped most people before they even began. But Sarah also knew that defending herself would only fuel more speculation and give Jake additional opportunities to paint her as defensive or entitled. So she continued to focus on her manual, taking notes on underwater navigation techniques, while the conversation about her character continued at the other end of the room. The next morning brought the first major equipment exercise of the training program. Recruits were required to demonstrate proficiency with various weapons systems and communication devices that SEALs used in actual operations. The exercise would test not only technical knowledge but also the ability to perform complex tasks under pressure. Sarah had studied the equipment manuals extensively during her preparation for BUD/S, and she had practiced with similar systems during her previous military training. But she was aware that her familiarity with the equipment would likely be interpreted as further evidence of special preparation rather than dedicated study. As the recruits assembled around the first weapons station, Instructor Rodriguez began explaining the exercise protocols. Each candidate would have to disassemble, clean, and reassemble an M4 carbine while blindfolded, then demonstrate proper firing techniques on the shooting range. This isn't about being fast, Rodriguez explained. This is about being thorough and safe. In the field, your weapon maintenance could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Take your time, follow procedures, and don't try to show off. Jake Morrison was selected to go first, and he performed adequately, though his blindfolded reassembly was slow and he made several minor errors that Rodriguez corrected. Chris Parker followed with a similar performance, demonstrating competence, but not excellence. When Sarah's turn came, she could feel the attention of the entire group focused on her. She knew that her performance would be scrutinized not just by the instructors, but by every recruit who had theories about her background and preparation. Sarah approached the weapons station calmly and listened carefully as Rodriguez repeated the instructions. When the blindfold was placed over her eyes, she took a deep breath and began the disassembly process, her hands moving with steady confidence over the familiar components. Her muscle memory from hours of practice during her preparation served her well. She completed the disassembly quickly but methodically, organizing each component in the proper sequence for cleaning and reassembly. The cleaning process went smoothly, and when it came time to reassemble the weapon, her movements were precise and efficient. "Time," called Rodriguez as Sarah completed the final function check. "Excellent work, Martinez. Clean, fast, and error-free. That's exactly what we want to see." The praise from the instructor was genuine, but Sarah noticed the expressions on her fellow recruits' faces. Instead of impressed looks, she saw confirmation of their existing suspicions. To them, her performance wasn't evidence of preparation and skill. It was proof that she had received special training. "Unbelievable," Jake muttered to Chris as they moved to the next station. "She performed that like she's been doing it professionally for years. No way that's just from studying manuals." The communications equipment exercise produced similar results. Sarah demonstrated familiarity with radio protocols and electronic systems that impressed the instructors, but further convinced some recruits that she had insider knowledge of the training program. During the lunch break following the equipment exercises, Jake decided to confront Sarah directly about her performance. He approached her table with Chris Parker and 2 other recruits, creating an informal tribunal that was clearly intended to put pressure on her to explain herself. "Okay, Martinez," Jake said, sitting down without invitation. "It's time to come clean. That weapons performance was professional-level stuff. Where did you really train before coming here?" Sarah looked up from her meal and assessed the situation. 4 recruits were staring at her expectantly, and she could see that other conversations in the mess hall had quieted as people focused on this confrontation. "I studied the manuals and practiced whenever I could," Sarah replied simply. "Same as anyone who takes this training seriously." "Bull," Chris Parker interjected. "I studied too. We all studied. Nobody performs like that just from reading books and watching videos. You've had hands-on professional instruction." "From who?" added Jake. "Military contractors? Private trainers? Or did Daddy arrange for some active duty SEALs to give you personal lessons?" The accusation about her father struck particularly deep because it was both completely false and impossible for Sarah to disprove without revealing personal information she wasn't ready to share. Her father had died when she was 15, and his death was directly connected to the meaning behind her butterfly tattoo. "My preparation is my business," Sarah said, keeping her voice level despite the anger building inside her. "If you spend as much time focusing on your own training as you do worrying about mine, maybe your performance would improve." It was the first time Sarah had directly pushed back against the speculation about her background, and the comment clearly stung Jake's pride. His face flushed red, and she could see him struggling to maintain his composure. "My performance is just fine," Jake said through gritted teeth. "What bothers me is that we're supposed to be a team, but we've got someone who won't be honest about her background or her preparation. How can we trust someone who's obviously hiding something?" The trust argument was becoming Jake's favorite weapon against Sarah. by framing her privacy as secrecy and her secrecy as untrustworthiness. He was trying to turn her natural reserve into a character flaw that justified the group's suspicion of her. Trust is earned through actions, Sarah replied, echoing her previous response to similar accusations. When the time comes, my actions will speak for themselves. Right? Jake said sarcastically. Everything will be revealed in time. Very mysterious. Very convenient. He stood up from the table and looked down at Sarah with undisguised hostility. You know what I think? I think you're afraid that if we knew the truth about your background, we'd realize you don't belong here. That butterfly tattoo is just the tip of the iceberg. With that, Jake and his followers left Sarah alone at the table. But the confrontation had been public enough that it would inevitably become a topic of discussion throughout the afternoon, further polarizing the training group's opinions about her presence in the program. The afternoon brought surf passage training, one of the most demanding exercises in the BUD/S curriculum. Recruits had to work in teams to carry heavy inflatable boats through rough ocean surf, coordinate their movements precisely, and demonstrate the kind of seamless teamwork that would be essential in actual SEAL operations. Sarah found herself assigned to a boat crew that included Jake Morrison, Chris Parker, and 3 other recruits who had been influenced by Jake's negative assessment of her character. The assignment was clearly not accidental. Instructor Rodriguez wanted to see how the group dynamics would affect their ability to function as a team under pressure. The boat crews were required to carry their inflatable boats, known as IBSs, inflatable boat, small, from the beach into the surf, navigate through breaking waves, and then return to shore in a coordinated formation. Each boat weighed several hundred pounds when fully loaded with equipment, and successful passage required perfect timing and communication among all crew members. As Sarah's crew prepared to enter the water, Jake positioned himself as the informal leader and began issuing instructions. Okay, everyone needs to pull their weight on this, he said pointedly. No weak links, no special considerations. We succeed or fail as a team. The comment was clearly directed at Sarah, but she ignored the provocation and focused on her assigned position at the front right of the boat. Her job would be to help guide the craft through the waves while maintaining the rhythm necessary for effective paddling. The first attempt at surf passage went poorly for several boat crews, including Sarah's. The coordination required to navigate heavy boats through breaking waves while maintaining formation proved more difficult than most recruits had anticipated. Sarah's crew made it through the surf, but fell behind the other teams and struggled to maintain their position during the return trip. We need better communication, Sarah called out as they paddled back toward shore. The timing is off. Maybe the timing would be better if everyone was honest about their experience level. Jake shot back breathlessly. Hard to coordinate with someone when you don't know what they're really capable of. Even during the middle of a demanding physical exercise, Jake couldn't resist another dig at Sarah's background and preparation. But Sarah noticed that his criticism of her wasn't based on any actual mistakes she had made. Her performance during the surf passage had been solid, and she had pulled her weight throughout the exercise. The second attempt went better. Sarah suggested a modification to their paddling rhythm that improved their coordination, and the crew successfully completed the passage with much better timing. But instead of acknowledging her contribution, Jake attributed the improvement to the crew's overall adjustment to the exercise. See what happens when everyone focuses on the team instead of showing off individual skills, he announced as they carried their boat back to the assembly area. Instructor Rodriguez had been observing the boat crews closely throughout the exercise, and Sarah suspected he had noticed the interpersonal dynamics affecting her crew's performance. During the debriefing session that followed, he addressed teamwork and trust in ways that seemed directed at the ongoing tensions within the training group. Surf passage is about more than physical strength and technical skill, Rodriguez explained to the assembled recruits. It's about trusting the people next to you and knowing that they trust you. If you're spending energy worrying about your teammates' motivations or backgrounds, you're not focusing on the mission. He paused and made eye contact with several recruits, including Jake and Sarah. Some of you are carrying baggage that has nothing to do with training. Personal conflicts, assumptions, prejudices. That baggage will get you killed in the field, and it's making you weaker here. Figure it out or find a new career path. The warning was clear, but Sarah doubted it would change the fundamental dynamics that had developed within the group. If anything, Jake would probably interpret the instructor's comments as validation that Sarah was causing problems through her secrecy and unwillingness to integrate fully with the team. That evening, as recruits cleaned their gear and prepared for the next day's training, word spread that Hell Week would begin in exactly 5 days. The announcement created a new level of tension and anxiety that overshadowed even the ongoing speculation about Sarah's background. Hell Week was legendary among military personnel for its brutality and effectiveness at separating truly committed candidates from those who were merely curious about becoming SEALs. The 5 and a half-day period would involve nearly continuous training with a maximum of 4 hours of sleep total, designed to push every recruit beyond their perceived physical and mental limits. Tommy Peterson approached Sarah during the evening equipment cleaning session, speaking quietly to avoid attracting attention from Jake's group. "Hey, I wanted to ask you something," he said nervously. "I'm pretty worried about Hell Week. Do you have any advice for getting through it?" Sarah appreciated that Tommy was willing to seek her counsel despite the social pressure to view her with suspicion. "Focus on one evolution at a time," she said quietly. "Don't think about the whole week. Just get through the current exercise, then the next one, then the next one. And remember that everyone is suffering equally. The key is who can keep functioning despite the suffering." "Right," Tommy nodded. "That makes sense. Can I ask you something else?" He glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "What's the real story with your tattoo? I'm not trying to give you grief about it, but people are making it into this big mystery, and I think it's affecting team morale." It was a fair question asked with genuine concern rather than hostility. Tommy had proven himself to be one of the more decent recruits in the group, and Sarah found herself tempted to tell him at least part of the truth. But she also knew that any information she shared with Tommy would inevitably spread to other recruits, possibly making the situation worse rather than better. "It's connected to someone important to me," Sarah said finally. "Someone who believed I could do this even when I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Beyond that, it's private." Tommy nodded respectfully. "Okay, I get it. But maybe you should consider that the mystery is causing more problems than the truth would. People are making up stories because they don't have facts. People are making up stories because they've decided what kind of person I am based on how I look," Sarah replied. "Giving them more information won't change their fundamental assumptions about whether I belong here." "Maybe," Tommy conceded. "But it might help with some of the more reasonable people in the group. Not everyone is like Jake and his crew." Sarah appreciated Tommy's optimism, but she had seen how quickly even well-intentioned recruits could be influenced by dominant personalities like Jake's. The social dynamics of military training programs tended to polarize around strong leaders, and Jake had positioned himself as the voice of traditional military values and skepticism toward outsiders. The next morning brought an unexpected development that would shift the group's attention away from Sarah's background, at least temporarily. During the morning formation, Chief Petty Officer Williams announced that the training class would be receiving a visit from a group of active duty SEAL team members who would observe their exercises and provide feedback on their progress. "These are operators who have served in combat zones around the world," Williams explained. "They'll be evaluating your performance and providing recommendations about your suitability for advanced training phases. This is not a test you can study for. They'll be looking at your instincts, your decision-making under pressure, and your ability to function as part of a team." The announcement created immediate anxiety among all the recruits. Being evaluated by actual SEALs was both an honor and a terrifying prospect. These were the men and women they hoped to serve alongside if they successfully completed BUD/S, and their opinions would carry significant weight in determining who advanced to the next phase of training. Sarah felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that came with high-stakes evaluations. She was confident in her abilities, but she also knew that the social dynamics within her training group could affect her performance if she wasn't careful to manage them properly. Jake Morrison seemed particularly energized by the prospect of being evaluated by active duty SEALs. Sarah suspected he viewed it as an opportunity to demonstrate his leadership qualities and his concerns about team cohesion, possibly including his doubts about her suitability for the program. The visiting SEAL team arrived that afternoon, a group of 6 operators led by a woman who immediately commanded the attention and respect of every person on the training grounds. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos was a 15-year veteran of special operations, with multiple combat deployments and a reputation for excellence that was legendary even among elite units. Sarah found herself studying Lieutenant Commander Santos intently, noting the quiet confidence and professional bearing that marked truly exceptional military leaders. Santos was roughly the same size as Sarah, proving that effectiveness in special operations wasn't dependent on physical intimidation or traditional masculine characteristics. As the visiting team observed the afternoon's training exercises, Sarah noticed that Lieutenant Commander Santos paid particular attention to leadership dynamics and team interactions. She wasn't just watching individual performance. She was analyzing how recruits worked together and how they handled stress and conflict. During a particularly challenging obstacle course exercise, Sarah found herself running alongside Jake Morrison as they approached a wall climb that required teamwork to complete successfully. The obstacle was designed so that the first person up had to help pull the following team members over the wall. Jake reached the wall first and quickly scrambled to the top. As Sarah approached, she expected him to extend a hand to help her up, which was the standard protocol for this obstacle. Instead, Jake hesitated for a moment, glancing toward where Lieutenant Commander Santos was standing. "Come on, butterfly girl," Jake called out loud enough for the observing SEALs to hear. "Show us what you've got." It was a deliberate provocation designed to make Sarah appear dependent on special assistance, while making Jake look like a leader who held his teammates to high standards. But Sarah had anticipated this kind of challenge and was prepared for it. Instead of reaching for Jake's offered hand, Sarah attacked the wall with explosive energy, using her momentum and upper body strength to pull herself over without assistance. She completed the obstacle faster than Jake had, demonstrating both physical capability and independence. Lieutenant Commander Santos noticed the interaction and made a note on her evaluation pad. Sarah couldn't tell whether the note was positive or negative, but she was confident that Santos had understood exactly what had transpired between her and Jake. The evening debrief with the visiting SEAL team was conducted in private, with only the instructors present. But word quickly spread among the recruits that their performance had been mixed, with some individuals receiving high marks and others being noted for areas of concern. As the training day ended and recruits prepared for sleep, Sarah reflected on the growing complexity of her situation. Hell Week was approaching rapidly, and she knew that the extreme stress and sleep deprivation would intensify all existing tensions within the group. The butterfly tattoo remained a symbol of everything her critics didn't understand about her, but Sarah was beginning to realize that the real test wouldn't be physical endurance or technical skills. The real test would be whether she could maintain her focus and performance while dealing with deliberate psychological pressure from people who were supposed to be her teammates. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Sarah was determined to meet them with the same quiet determination that had brought her this far. But she also knew that the time was approaching when she might have to make difficult choices about how much of her true story she was willing to reveal in order to preserve the unity and effectiveness of her training group. The butterfly tattoo held secrets that would surprise everyone who thought they understood what it represented. But Sarah wasn't ready to share those secrets yet, not until she was certain that the revelation would help rather than hurt her chances of becoming the SEAL she had promised someone very important that she would become. The air horn that signaled the beginning of Hell Week erupted at 2:47 a.m. on a moonless Sunday morning, shattering the sleep of every recruit in the BUD/S compound. Sarah Martinez jolted awake in her bunk, her heart immediately racing as instructors began shouting orders and banging metal trash cans throughout the barracks. "Move, move, move. Get outside now. Full gear. You have 3 minutes." The legendary Hell Week had begun, and with it came the most grueling test of endurance, determination, and mental toughness that the U.S. military had ever devised. For the next 5.5 days, recruits would get a maximum of 4 hours of sleep total while enduring nearly continuous physical and psychological stress designed to break anyone who wasn't completely committed to becoming a Navy SEAL. Sarah scrambled to put on her gear in the darkness, muscle memory from weeks of training guiding her hands as she secured her equipment and prepared for whatever challenges awaited outside. Around her, other recruits were moving with similar urgency, but she could already hear the strain in their voices and movements. "This is it," Tommy Peterson whispered as he struggled with his boots. "This is where we find out what we're really made of." Jake Morrison was surprisingly quiet as he prepared his gear, his usual bravado replaced by focused determination. Even he understood that Hell Week would test every recruit equally, regardless of their social standing within the group or their opinions about each other's backgrounds. The recruits stumbled outside into the cold morning air to find all the BUD/S instructors waiting for them, along with several additional personnel who had been brought in specifically for Hell Week operations. Chief Petty Officer Williams stood at the front of the formation, his expression more serious than Sarah had ever seen it. "Gentlemen and ladies, Williams announced, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled recruits. Welcome to Hell Week. For the next 5.5 days, you will be pushed beyond every limit you thought you had. You will discover muscles you didn't know existed and find strength you didn't know you possessed. Most of you will quit. That's not a prediction, it's a statistical fact. He gestured toward a brass bell mounted on a post near the edge of the formation area. That bell represents your ticket out of this program. Ring it 3 times, place your helmet on the ground beneath it, and your suffering ends immediately. Hot food, warm bed, and a ticket home to whatever comfortable life you had before you decided to try this. Sarah stared at the bell and tried to imagine the circumstances that would drive her to ring it. She had prepared for Hell Week as thoroughly as possible, but everyone warned that no amount of preparation could fully prepare someone for the reality of the experience. Your first evolution begins now, Williams continued. Surf passage in full gear. 6 times out, 6 times back. Teams have already been assigned. If you fall behind, the exercise continues without you. If you quit, the exercise continues without you. If you die, we'll pause long enough to move your body, and then the exercise continues without you. The gallows humor was typical of military instruction, but Sarah noticed that none of the recruits were laughing. The reality of what they were about to endure was settling in, and even the most confident candidates were beginning to understand the magnitude of the challenge ahead. Sarah found herself assigned to the same boat crew as Jake Morrison and Chris Parker, along with 3 other recruits she hadn't worked with extensively. The crew selection seemed deliberately designed to test interpersonal dynamics under extreme stress, forcing people with existing conflicts to depend on each other for survival. As they carried their inflatable boat toward the surf, Jake positioned himself near Sarah and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. Look, Martinez, I don't care what your story is or where you came from. For the next week, we're stuck together, and I'm not going to let personal issues get in the way of completing evolutions. It was the closest thing to a peace offering that Sarah was likely to get from Jake, and she appreciated the gesture. Agreed, she replied simply. Let's focus on the mission. The surf passage in full gear during the pre-dawn hours was brutal. The water was cold enough to cause immediate shock to anyone who entered it, and the weight of the equipment made every movement exponentially more difficult. Sarah's crew struggled with coordination during the first few passages, but gradually found their rhythm as they learned to work together under the extreme conditions. By the time they completed the 6th passage and dragged their boat back onto the beach, several recruits from other crews had already dropped out of the exercise. Sarah could see the exhaustion in everyone's faces, and they had been at this for less than 2 hours. Outstanding effort, called Instructor Rodriguez as the remaining crews assembled on the beach. Now drop, and give me 50 push-ups. After that, we're going for a little run. The little run turned out to be a 4-mile beach run in boots and full gear, followed immediately by another hour of calisthenics, followed by a timed obstacle course, followed by more surf passage exercises. The pattern continued without break as the sun came up, revealing the full scope of the day's planned activities. Sarah found herself settling into the mental state that she had practiced during her preparation for Hell Week. Instead of thinking about the entire week ahead or even the entire day ahead, she focused only on the current exercise. Complete this evolution. Move to the next evolution. Complete that evolution. Move to the next one. The butterfly tattoo on her shoulder blade became a source of strength rather than embarrassment as the morning progressed. Every time Sarah felt her energy flagging or her determination wavering, she remembered the promise the tattoo represented and the person who had believed in her ability to overcome any obstacle. Around midday, the first major dropout occurred in Sarah's training class. Chris Parker, who had been one of Jake Morrison's most vocal supporters in questioning Sarah's background, rang the bell after collapsing during a long-distance swim exercise. I can't do this, Chris gasped as the instructors helped him out of the water. I thought I could, but I can't. This is insane. Sarah watched Chris walk toward the bell with mixed emotions. Part of her felt sympathy for anyone who had reached their breaking point and made the difficult decision to quit. But another part of her couldn't help noting that one of her harshest critics had failed to last even 12 hours into Hell Week. Jake Morrison's reaction to Chris's departure was more complex. Sarah could see that losing his closest ally in the group had shaken his confidence, but it had also seemed to deepen his determination to prove himself. If anything, Chris's failure made Jake more focused on his own performance rather than continuing to worry about Sarah's background or motivations. The afternoon brought log PT, one of the most dreaded exercises in the BUD/S curriculum. Teams of recruits were required to lift, carry, and maneuver telephone pole-sized logs through various exercises designed to build teamwork and mental toughness. The logs weighed several hundred pounds and required perfect coordination to move safely. Sarah's boat crew was assigned a log and began the series of exercises that would continue for the next 3 hours. Lifting the log overhead, carrying it for extended distances, doing squats while holding it, and maneuvering it through obstacle courses while maintaining formation. "Martinez, you need to pull more weight on your side," Jake called out during one particularly difficult overhead lift. "We're not balanced." Sarah adjusted her grip and applied more upward pressure, but she could feel that the distribution of weight among the crew members was genuinely uneven. Her smaller size meant she was carrying a proportionally larger share of the log's weight relative to her body weight, but she was determined not to be the weak link. "Better," Jake acknowledged as they completed the lift. "Everyone needs to find a way to contribute equally, regardless of size." The comment was fair and constructive rather than hostile, a sign that the shared suffering of Hell Week was beginning to break down some of the artificial barriers that had developed during the earlier training phases. As the day progressed into evening, the sleep deprivation began to affect everyone's performance and decision-making abilities. Recruits who had been sharp and focused that morning were making simple mistakes and struggling with basic coordination. Sarah felt the fog of exhaustion settling over her mind, but she fought to maintain mental clarity through sheer force of will. The dinner break was deliberately brief, giving recruits just enough time to consume a basic meal before the evening evolutions began. Sarah ate mechanically, focusing on getting calories and nutrients into her body rather than enjoying the food. Around her, conversation was minimal as everyone conserved energy for the challenges ahead. "How are you holding up?" Tommy Peterson asked quietly as they prepared to return to training. "One evolution at a time," Sarah replied, repeating the advice she had given him earlier. "Don't think about tomorrow. Just focus on getting through the next exercise." Tommy nodded, but Sarah could see the doubt creeping into his expression. The first day of Hell Week was traditionally one of the easier days, designed to establish baseline expectations before the truly brutal exercises began. If recruits were already struggling with basic endurance, the rest of the week would be nearly impossible. The evening brought night navigation exercises, where boat crews had to coordinate movements in complete darkness while carrying heavy equipment across difficult terrain. The exercise tested not only physical endurance, but also leadership abilities and communication skills under extreme stress. Sarah's crew struggled initially with coordination in the darkness, but gradually developed a system for maintaining contact and direction. Jake emerged as the natural leader for the group, and Sarah found herself supporting his decisions rather than challenging them. The artificial conflicts of the earlier training phases seemed insignificant compared to the immediate challenges of completing evolutions successfully. As midnight approached, marking the end of the first official day of Hell Week, Sarah realized that her perspective on her fellow recruits was changing. The extreme stress and shared suffering were stripping away the superficial judgments and social dynamics that had dominated the earlier phases of training. Jake Morrison was proving himself to be a capable leader under pressure, regardless of his previous attitudes towards Sarah's background. Tommy Peterson was showing more resilience than anyone had expected. Even some of the recruits who had seemed weakest during regular training were finding reserves of strength they hadn't known they possessed. The butterfly tattoo that had been such a source of speculation and criticism during the earlier weeks had become irrelevant. No one had the energy to worry about Sarah's background or preparation when they were struggling just to complete basic physical tasks. The tattoo was still there, still meaningful to Sarah, but it was no longer a symbol of division within the group. The second day of Hell Week began without any break from the first day. As exhausted recruits struggled to their feet for another round of surf passage exercises, Sarah noticed that several more candidates had decided to ring the bell during the brief rest periods. "Don't look at the quitters," advised instructor Rodriguez as the remaining recruits assembled for morning formation. "Focus on the people who are still here. These are your teammates now. These are the people you need to depend on, and who need to depend on you." The second day introduced new levels of complexity to the standard exercises. Boat crews had to complete surf passages while carrying additional equipment. Obstacle courses had to be navigated while teams remained physically connected to each other. Swimming exercises were conducted in rougher water conditions with heavier gear loads. Sarah found herself taking on more leadership responsibilities within her boat crew as the day progressed. Jake remained the primary decision-maker, but Sarah's technical knowledge and calm demeanor under pressure made her a valuable advisor when complex problems arose. During a particularly challenging equipment exercise, Sarah noticed that one of their crew members was showing signs of serious exhaustion that went beyond normal Hell Week fatigue. The recruit was stumbling frequently, having difficulty following basic instructions, and showing signs of confusion that suggested possible heat exhaustion or dehydration. "Jake," Sarah called quietly, "I think Peterson might be in real trouble. He's not responding normally." Jake looked over at Tommy Peterson and immediately saw what Sarah was observing. Tommy was still moving and trying to participate in the exercise, but his movements were uncoordinated and his responses to verbal commands were delayed. "Should we say something to the instructors?" Jake asked, genuinely uncertain about the right course of action. It was a difficult decision. Alerting the instructors to Tommy's condition might save him from serious medical problems, but it would also likely result in his removal from the program. In the SEAL community, looking out for teammates was considered a fundamental obligation, but so was allowing individuals to push themselves to their absolute limits. "Tommy," Sarah called over to the struggling recruit. "How are you feeling? Talk to me." I'm okay," Tommy replied, but his words were slurred and his eyes weren't focusing properly. "Just tired. Really tired." Sarah made the decision that would define her character in the eyes of her boat crew and the observing instructors. "Instructor Rodriguez," she called out, raising her hand to get attention. "Peterson needs medical evaluation. Something's not right." The medical evaluation confirmed that Tommy was suffering from severe dehydration and early-stage heat exhaustion. He was immediately removed from Hell Week and taken to the base hospital for treatment. The action saved Tommy from potentially serious medical complications, but it also ended his chance of becoming a SEAL. Jake Morrison watched the medical team escort Tommy away from the training area, then turned to Sarah with a new expression of respect. "That was the right call," he said simply. "That took guts." "It was the only call," Sarah replied. "We don't leave teammates behind, and we don't let them hurt themselves when we can prevent it." The incident marked a turning point in how Sarah's boat crew viewed her role in the group. Her willingness to potentially sacrifice training time to ensure Tommy's safety demonstrated the kind of judgment and priorities that marked genuine leadership potential. As the second day progressed into the second night, the sleep deprivation began to create more serious challenges for all remaining recruits. Hallucinations, confusion, and emotional instability became common as brains struggled to function without adequate rest. Sarah found herself fighting off visual distortions and auditory hallucinations that made it difficult to distinguish between real instructions and imagined commands. The butterfly tattoo on her shoulders seemed to move and change shape when she caught glimpses of it in mirrors or reflective surfaces. But even in her exhausted and disoriented state, Sarah held on to the central meaning of the tattoo and the promise it represented. Every time her resolve weakened, she remembered why she was here and what she was trying to accomplish. The third day of Hell Week introduced the infamous surf torture, an exercise designed to test mental toughness through sustained exposure to cold water. Recruits had to sit in the surf with their arms linked together, allowing the cold waves to wash over them repeatedly while maintaining formation and responding to instructors' commands. The water temperature was cold enough to cause hypothermia if exposure continued too long, and the exercise was carefully monitored by medical personnel. But the psychological impact of sitting motionless while freezing water crashed over exhausted bodies was designed to break anyone who wasn't completely committed to the program. Sarah linked arms with Jake Morrison and another recruit as they entered the surf and assumed the required position. The first wave that crashed over them was so cold it drove the air from her lungs and made her entire body convulse involuntarily. "Stay strong," Jake whispered through chattering teeth. "Don't let them see weakness." For the next hour, Sarah sat in the freezing surf while waves continuously crashed over the linked recruits. Her body temperature dropped steadily, and she could feel her thinking becoming sluggish as hypothermia began to set in. But she forced herself to remain alert and responsive, knowing that any sign of serious distress would result in immediate removal from the exercise. The butterfly tattoo on her shoulder was completely numb from the cold, but in her mind, Sarah could still feel its presence and meaning. She thought about the person who had inspired her to get the tattoo and what they would think of her current situation. The mental connection to that memory gave her strength to endure the physical discomfort. When the surf torture finally ended, several more recruits had rung the bell rather than continue with the program. The attrition rate was accelerating as the compound effects of sleep deprivation, physical exhaustion, and psychological stress pushed more candidates beyond their breaking points. Sarah's boat crew now consisted of only 4 members, down from the original 7. But the 4 who remained had been forged into a tight unit by their shared experiences and their willingness to support each other through increasingly difficult challenges. As the 3rd day transitioned into the 3rd night, Sarah realized that she was entering uncharted territory in terms of physical and mental endurance. She had pushed herself hard during her preparation for Hell Week, but nothing could have fully prepared her for the reality of sustained sleep deprivation combined with continuous physical stress. The hallucinations were becoming more frequent and more vivid. During one-night exercise, Sarah was convinced she saw her father standing on the beach watching the training, even though he had been dead for 7 years. The vision was so realistic that she almost called out to him before catching herself. But even as her grip on reality became tenuous, Sarah's determination remained solid. The butterfly tattoo represented a promise she had made, and she would honor that promise regardless of the personal cost. Hell Week was testing everything she had, but it was also revealing reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. The 4th day brought the realization that Sarah was going to survive Hell Week. More than half of the original candidates had already rung the bell, but the core group that remained showed no signs of quitting. They had moved beyond the point where the exercises were testing their willingness to continue. Now the exercises were testing their ability to function effectively while operating at the absolute limits of human endurance. Sarah's relationship with Jake Morrison had evolved into genuine mutual respect. Their boat crew had become one of the most effective units in the remaining training class, and both Sarah and Jake had demonstrated leadership qualities that impressed the observing instructors. "You know," Jake said during one of the brief meal breaks, "I owe you an apology. I made a lot of assumptions about you based on stupid superficial stuff. You've proven yourself a dozen times over." Sarah appreciated the apology, but she also understood that Hell Week had changed everyone's perspective on what really mattered. The artificial social dynamics of the earlier training phases seemed trivial compared to the bonds that were being forged through shared extreme adversity. "We all made assumptions," Sarah replied diplomatically. "What matters is how we work together now." As Hell Week entered its final phases, Sarah knew that she had successfully proven herself to her fellow recruits, to the instructors, and, most importantly, to herself. The butterfly tattoo that had been a source of mockery and speculation had become a symbol of the inner strength that had carried her through the most difficult test of her life. But Sarah also knew that Hell Week was only the beginning. The real challenges of SEAL training lay ahead, and the relationships and reputation she had built during this crucible would define her experience throughout the rest of BUD/S and beyond. The butterfly tattoo still held its secrets, but now those secrets were balanced by proven performance under the most extreme conditions. Whatever revelations lay ahead, Sarah had earned the right to be taken seriously as a future Navy SEAL. 3 weeks after Hell Week ended, the surviving members of BUD/S Class 347 had settled into the rhythm of Phase 2 training. The brutal initiation period was behind them, and the 23 recruits who remained had earned a new level of respect from their instructors and from each other. Sarah Martinez had not only survived the legendary test of endurance, but had emerged as one of the most promising candidates in her class. The relationship dynamics within the training group had been completely transformed by their shared experience of extreme adversity. Jake Morrison, who had once been Sarah's harshest critic, had become one of her most reliable teammates. The butterfly tattoo that had been such a source of speculation and mockery during the early weeks was now rarely mentioned, having been overshadowed by Sarah's proven performance under pressure. But Phase 2 brought new challenges that tested different aspects of SEAL readiness. Where Phase 1 had focused primarily on physical endurance and mental toughness, Phase 2 emphasized technical skills, tactical knowledge, and the kind of precise teamwork required for actual special operations missions. Sarah excelled at the technical training modules. Her background in engineering and her meticulous approach to learning new systems made her particularly effective during weapons training, communication protocols, and navigation exercises. The instructors began assigning her additional responsibilities and using her performance as a standard for other recruits to meet. During a complex underwater demolition exercise, Sarah demonstrated an intuitive understanding of explosive calculations and placement techniques that impressed even the most experienced instructors. Her work was precise, efficient, and showed the kind of innovative thinking that marked potential leaders in the special operations community. Outstanding work, Martinez, commented Lieutenant Rodriguez after reviewing Sarah's demolition setup. Your approach shows real tactical thinking. You're not just following procedures, you're understanding the principles behind them and adapting them to specific situations. The praise was well-earned, but Sarah noticed that it also created new challenges within the group dynamics. While her fellow recruits no longer questioned her right to be in the program, some were beginning to view her rapid advancement with a different kind of resentment. "She's making the rest of us look bad," complained a recruit named Marcus Wright during one evening discussion. "The instructors are starting to use her work as the example for everything. It's like they expect all of us to perform at her level." Jake Morrison, who had become protective of Sarah since Hell Week, quickly shut down that line of criticism. "Maybe instead of complaining about her success, you should focus on improving your own performance. She earns every bit of recognition she gets." The defense was appreciated, but Sarah could see that her rapid progress was creating subtle tensions even among recruits who respected her abilities. Being the standout performer in a group of highly competitive individuals was its own form of isolation. The situation became more complex when Sarah received an unexpected summons to report to the base commander's office. Such meetings were extremely rare for BUD/S candidates, and usually indicated either serious problems or extraordinary circumstances. Chief Petty Officer Williams delivered the message with an expression that gave no hint about the purpose of the meeting. "Report to Captain Morrison's office at 1,400 hours in dress uniform," he instructed. "Be on time, and be prepared for anything." Sarah spent the morning speculating about possible reasons for the summons. Had she made some serious error during training that she wasn't aware of? Was there a problem with her security clearance or background investigation? Or could this be related to her family history in ways she hadn't anticipated? The butterfly tattoo suddenly felt heavier on her shoulder as she prepared for the meeting. If this summons was connected to her past, she might finally be forced to reveal the secrets she had guarded so carefully throughout her time in BUD/S training. Captain Jennifer Morrison's office was located in the main administrative building, far from the training areas where Sarah spent most of her time. The space was formal and intimidating, filled with military awards, photographs of naval operations, and symbols of authority that reminded visitors of the serious nature of military service. Captain Morrison herself was an imposing figure even by military standards. At 45 years old, she had commanded multiple naval units and had a reputation for excellence that was respected throughout the special operations community. Her presence commanded immediate attention and respect. "Sit down, Martinez," Captain Morrison said as Sarah entered the office and stood at attention. "This conversation is going to be informal, so you can relax your posture." Sarah took the offered seat but remained alert and ready to respond to whatever questions or challenges might be coming. Captain Morrison's expression was neutral, giving no indication about whether this meeting would be positive or negative. "I've been following your progress through BUD/S training," Captain Morrison began. "Your instructors have provided consistently positive reports about your technical skills, your leadership potential, and your performance under pressure. Hell Week, in particular, seems to have been a defining experience for you." "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah replied, unsure about the appropriate level of response to the captain's comments. "However," Captain Morrison continued, "there are some aspects of your background that have raised questions among the administrative staff. Not concerns about your suitability for the program, but questions about information that appears to be missing or incomplete in your service records." Sarah's heart rate increased as she realized that this meeting was indeed connected to her personal history. The carefully guarded secrets behind her butterfly tattoo might be about to become part of her official military record. "Your father was Master Chief Petty Officer Robert Martinez," Captain Morrison stated, reading from a file on her desk. "Killed in action during a classified SEAL operation 7 years ago. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the emotional impact of hearing her father's death described in such clinical terms. "What's interesting," Captain Morrison continued, "is that your father specifically requested that certain information about his family be classified and protected from routine background investigations. That protection has been honored, but it means that some people involved in your training don't have access to complete information about your background." Sarah began to understand the purpose of this meeting. Her father's status as a fallen SEAL had been deliberately concealed from her training records, possibly to prevent her from receiving special treatment or being judged based on his reputation rather than her own merits. "Your butterfly tattoo," Captain Morrison said, surprising Sarah with the directness of the observation. "It's not actually a butterfly, is it?" The question hung in the air as Sarah realized that Captain Morrison somehow knew the true meaning behind the design that had been the subject of so much speculation among her fellow recruits. "No, ma'am," Sarah admitted. "It's not a butterfly. It's your father's SEAL trident, modified to look like a butterfly at first glance. The design incorporates elements from the insignia he earned, arranged in a pattern that honors his memory while maintaining operational security about your family connection to the SEAL community." Sarah was stunned that Captain Morrison knew the true meaning of her tattoo. She had assumed that the design's true nature would remain hidden unless she chose to reveal it herself. "How did you know?" Sarah asked, momentarily forgetting military protocol in her surprise. "Because I served with your father," Captain Morrison replied, her formal demeanor softening slightly. "Robert Martinez was one of the finest SEALs I ever had the privilege to work with. His death was a loss to the entire Special Operations community." The revelation that Captain Morrison had known her father personally added an entirely new dimension to this conversation. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and apprehension as she realized that her performance during BUD/S training had been observed by someone who could compare it to her father's legacy. "Your father made me promise that if you ever decided to pursue a career in special operations, I would ensure that you succeeded or failed based entirely on your own merits," Captain Morrison continued. "No special treatment, no shortcuts, and no interference from people who might want to help you because of your family connection. That's why the information was classified," Sarah realized. "To protect me from being judged as Robert Martinez's daughter instead of as Sarah Martinez, recruit." "Exactly. Your father was worried that his reputation might become either a burden or an unfair advantage for you. He wanted you to have the opportunity to build your own legacy without being overshadowed by his accomplishments." Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude toward her father for having the wisdom to protect her in this way. The speculation and criticism about her background during the early weeks of training had been difficult, but it had also ensured that her eventual success would be undeniably her own. "However," Captain Morrison said, returning to her more formal tone, "there are some practical considerations that we need to address now that you've proven yourself during Hell Week and the subsequent training phases." She handed Sarah a folder containing what appeared to be official documentation. "These are requests from several senior SEAL commanders asking for information about your background and availability for special assignment opportunities. Word has spread about your performance, and there's significant interest in your potential for advanced training programs." Sarah opened the folder and saw requests from some of the most elite units within the Special Operations community. The documents indicated that her reputation had already reached levels far beyond what she had imagined possible for a BUD/S candidate. "The question," Captain Morrison explained, "is whether you want to continue operating under the protected identity that your father arranged, or whether you're ready to acknowledge your family connection and accept the opportunities and responsibilities that come."